Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Hi, and welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. How's your week been, Jess?
Oh, it's a little hectic getting ready to head off to Paris this afternoon on my way to the south of France for the Cannes Lions. So just a little, stressful getting packed and ready to go, but we're almost there. So we're actually recording a little bit early this week to make sure that we have something, because next week's just going to be too hectic to do anything.
The good news is there's plenty of news stories, plenty of content, even without the extra time.
So much content this week, but we'll get to that. Anyway, how's your week? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, week's been good. Was here in London for London Tech Week. We went and checked that out. We sure did. Definitely some logistical challenges getting in and all of that. But we met with some really great startups, talked to some really interesting people in the space. And, I think one of the highlights was getting to see Jenson from NVIDIA speak.
Yeah. He's the rock star of AI right now.
And doesn't he know it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I think it was an interesting speech. He was up there with Starmer, the PM of the UK. And he was talking about kind of this analogy, which I think is really interesting for this group. The analogy that he was using is that AI is a spaceship and that you have to get on. And if you're on, then you're moving at the speed that everyone else is and you're not going to get lost. That being said, he did make a comment, which I think, open to interpretation, but it was, he basically was saying, to me, AI is moving at just the right speed, the speed I'm making it go. And he really did use the word I. So
he really did. Yeah.
I'm gonna translate that to the speed that the spaceship is going once you're on it, and it's going at the right speed. And I just think that to this community, it's all about not getting overwhelmed, not getting left behind. No one is being left behind at this point, but it's good to start learning these tools at a really fundamental level so that as the spaceship takes off, you don't get left behind.
Well, I also think that, NVIDIA really is powering a lot of this AI stuff. Like everyone is kind of relying on them. So I think that is also where he's coming from. Like it's a little arrogant for him to say it, but he's not wrong given how important NVIDIA is for this whole AI revolution.
Okay, before we start diving into our topic today, I want to set the scene a bit. So I have to tell you, Jess, about how my mornings have completely changed over the past few months, and I promise it will tie into what we're talking about.
Okay, so this should be good. What's changed in your morning routine?
Okay, well, instead of maybe doom scrolling through social media, which, not saying I did that, maybe.
I mean, I definitely do that. So
yeah, but now I start every day with a deep research on whatever random topic pops into my head. It's usually very topical.
Okay, so you do it before your morning coffee. That's pretty ambitious.
Yeah, well, okay, not quite that, as you can tell from my morning coffee here that I had to go get. But it's actually even better than that if you think about it, because by the time I basically wake up, go get my coffee, and I'm sitting in my shorebird chair on my balcony with my coffee, in the amount of time that takes, I have this incredibly detailed, well-sourced analysis waiting for me. So it's basically like having my own little personal research team that worked all night to prepare my morning briefing. Um, the research can be anything. It could be how are tariffs actually affecting small businesses? It could give me a deep dive on the history of X, Y, and Z. Classic history nerd over here. Whatever topic I'm interested in at the moment.
So you're actually not the first person that I know who does this. I have a colleague who also does this during her morning coffee, and with her, it's very much more like, looking at when Netflix does their earnings call, she'll do a
Mm-hmm.
deep dive into their earnings call. But you are actually not the first person I know who does their morning AI deep research.
That's a great use case as well. Like what
Yeah.
happened to the markets yesterday, or typically, I'll start thinking about business ideas. So, what would it take to launch a cold brew brand, for instance?
I know how much you love your cold brew. I know that this has actually been something you've been thinking about for a very long time.
Yeah, I think I probably have told everyone who will listen about my cold brew idea.
Your
Um,
cold brew is like rocket fuel, so I'm terrified of
I mean,
what you're going to be getting up to.
just waiting to give it to the people so that they
Oh
can
God.
experience it. But instead of going down a rabbit hole for hours like you might normally, I just ask ChatGPT to do a deep, market analysis, and 15 minutes later, you have a business plan.
So you're telling me in 15 minutes you've got your whole cold brew business mapped out?
With the right prompt engineering, like we talked about,
Yeah.
last week, I'm talking competitive landscape, supply chain challenges, distribution strategies, regulatory stuff, consumer trends, everything you need to know that's worth pursuing. It's honestly better research than I've seen from, some consulting firms, writing like multi-page PDFs.
So are you ditching early adopter? You're going to go start your cold brew company now.
Never. I'd never leave you, Jess.
Thank God for
But
that. I can't
but
do it by myself.
but hey, with ChatGPT on my side, maybe I can do it in the background. I don't know, but
In your spare time.
in my whatever spare time I have. But I think, but the point is, in the time it used to take me to think about maybe doing some research, I actually have actionable intelligence about an entire industry, whatever that I want that to be.
I mean, that is pretty cool. I will give you that. That's a good use of your morning rather than doom scrolling.
Exactly. So, with that, I told you the story would come back around. Let's
Right.
dive into the topic for today, which is what we've just been talking about, deep research. This is one of those AI capabilities that I think will fundamentally change how businesses make decisions, but it's probably still flying under the radar for most users, or potentially people haven't quite checked it out yet, even if they've been playing around with ChatGPT and Claude, as we've been encouraging people to do the last few weeks.
Yeah, I really love that we're covering this because I think people hear research and just immediately think that they don't need it because they're not, academic or they're not doing research or it's just a nice to have, but actually deep research can be really transformative for anyone running a business.
Yeah, and it's not just, glorified Google searching. But let's dive into what that is. So we talk a lot about our infinite intern. I think we're going to keep using this as our analogy to
Yeah.
help people through. And this is very similar. This is no exception. But in this instance, the intern has a PhD in every imaginable topic. And the key difference is that they're not just finding information, but they're also synthesizing it. So, traditionally research can be very fragmented, but deep research, what it will do is it'll give you analysis, patterns, and actionable insights.
Yeah, so I just want to bring this back to something that we've talked about before, which is our ABI principle, our always be iterating mindset.
Love
And
it.
we've my favorite. We've said it from the beginning, and the key to getting good output from AI is treating it like a conversation. You prompt, you adjust, you dig deeper, you refine. Like, we keep talking about it. You just keep iterating and iterating, and you don't just ask and walk away. That's not how
Mhm.
you make the best use of AI.
Yeah, it's like working with a junior teammate. You guide them, give feedback, and help them sharpen the result through that back and forth conversation. And as we've talked about, using ChatGPT right now is probably feeling somewhat manual or step by step. We talk about that conversation, and that is helpful and it works, but it also takes time.
So this is going to introduce the idea of an AI agent, and this is a massive topic. But basically, if you think of an agent as AI that can run a whole iterative loop for you autonomously, that's essentially what an agent is.
And it's a big shift. Regular prompting is asking someone a direct question like, what's the capital of France? You get a quick answer, done.
Right. But what if you actually really need to investigate or to research something complex, like what are the most effective marketing strategies for reaching Gen Z in 2025, which is a pretty specific thing that you are looking into.
And it's not a simple answer. That's kind of a project. So, but that's what these agents are built for. They take on multi step tasks, they make a plan, gather information, sometimes from its existing knowledge or from the web. They analyze it, they adapt their approach as they go, and come back with a full report, not just a single response.
So if you're using ChatGPT to do competitor research, you might ask, who are my top competitors? Then what are the prices? Then what do customers say about them? Then what have they launched recently? You'd go back and forth manually. So that's what you would be doing if you weren't using deep research or an agent.
And instead, if you are using deep research, that agent can run that whole conversation for you automatically. So let's go through a quick example. If it sees a competitor recently launched a product, it might go investigate the customer reactions, check reviews, compare pricing, and analyze how it stacks up to your offering, all without you prompting it each time.
So it's like giving our infinite intern, who we really should name at some point because I feel like we keep talking. We'll have to think of a name.
Yeah.
But it's like giving them a research brief and then just letting them disappear for an hour. They use all the tools imaginable. They adapt their plan based on what they find, and then they come back with a really detailed, structured answer. So, and sometimes they can come back with dozens of resources, which is what you want. You want them to give you more information than not enough.
Mm-hmm. And I think the key kind of difference here is it's not waiting on you to guide every step, which, obviously has its pros and cons, but what it does do is it responds to the data that it's getting back and therefore goes deeper than you might otherwise based on the information that's there. It just keeps iterating until it builds something meaningful based on the data that's returning.
So that's what the power tools like ChatGPT's Deep Research, Claude Research, Gemini's Notebook, and Perplexity's Pro Research modes do. They're not just answering questions; they're acting as an autonomous research assistant that executes full workflows.
Yep, and we'll get into the tools, but we added Claude in here kind of last minute because I noticed their research function is in beta, but it is available.
Yes, there we go. And so if you've ever felt like AI gives decent answers, but like not a great analysis, this is the next step. So agents don't just respond, they reason, they investigate, and then they deliver the insight. And that's a really massive unlock and a really massive power for our listeners.
Absolutely. And as typical, we want to dive under the hood a little bit because I think getting into the weeds and understanding what's happening behind the scenes just helps us understand a little better. So what's actually happening while it's doing that? So while you're doing all these things in the background, the LLM is opening 50 plus browser tabs, reading through each article, taking detailed notes, cross-referencing facts between your sources in your different browser tabs, and then it writes a comprehensive summary.
So I'm going to take you through a really specific example. Last week, I asked Claude to research email marketing trends for SaaS companies. And here's what it actually did. So first, it broke down my question into smaller research tasks, current best practices, emerging trends, case studies, tool comparisons, performance metrics, like all that good stuff. And then it started searching, and I watched it in real time. It searched for SaaS email marketing 2025. It found 20 relevant articles, and then it searched for email automation trends, and it found more sources, and then SaaS email conversion rates. And you can actually see this, like you can see what it's searching for in real time. And so then it just kept building on that. But then here's where it gets really smart. So as it was reading about automation trends, it discovered that AI powered personalization was a hot topic, as any marketer knows right now. It's all about personalization. And so it automatically decided to research that as well. And it found a bunch of case studies. It looked up specific tools. It found some expert interviews about AI and email marketing. So it really went kind of above and beyond what I was expecting it to find. And it was literally just while I was sitting there watching it work. I probably went away and made a coffee as well, because I usually do that too. By the end, it had visited over 80 websites, synthesized a bunch of information from industry reports, case studies, expert opinions, recent news, and then organized all of that into a structured report with citations. So it was really cool.
And the citations bit is really
Mm,
useful.
yeah,
I
and very
adds a lot
important.
of trust, right? We'll
Yeah,
talk about that.
exactly. Well, and if
But
you when you look at the citations, you can actually see which sources that it's coming from, which means that you can kind of disregard the ones that are a little less
Mhm.
trustworthy. Although generally it's pretty good and it's pulling from, legitimate sources. But like if it's something that I've never heard of versus, a
Mhm.
trade publication or something from a consulting company or whatever, you can rely on that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So let's break down that process. The LLM is breaking down your question into smaller research tasks. So if you ask about competitive landscape for project management software, it decides it needs to research the top players. It'll decide to research their pricing. It'll break down their features. It'll go and look for customer reviews and market trends.
Then it goes and actually searches the web for each of these pieces, right?
Yeah, and it's using search engines to find the relevant websites. Then it's reading through those pages, sometimes hundreds of them, looking at company websites, review sites, industry reports, news articles, you name it.
Yeah, and here's what I really like because it's not actually just grabbing the first thing that it sees, it's comparing sources and it's looking for
Mhm.
patterns because, as we've said before, AI is really all about pattern recognition. And then it's trying to give you a balanced view. So it's giving you a wider range of what you're looking for.
Right. And also, if you use ChatGPT or some of these other tools, you'll ask it your initial prompt, and it'll usually ask for 4 to 5 clarifying questions,
Yes.
which it kind of gives you a little insight into how it's broken down its different tasks, and it will kind of help you define the direction that you want it to go. So it's also not going completely off on its own. You're going to help guide it based on how it's understanding your question and your prompt. But then after it's done all of this research and it's read all these sources, it will then synthesize all of this data into a structured report, again, with those citations, which I think as we go along and as we talk about more tools, and I think as LLMs evolve, this citation piece is going to become more and more important because as we've talked about, how do you reduce hallucinations and have
Mm.
trust in the system? Well, make sure that you're citing your sources. It's like any classic academic research paper. You need citations to understand where the data comes from.
Yeah. And speaking of which, let's talk about the actual tools that are available because they are not all the same. As we mentioned, Claude is, only in beta. So let's go into what tools we have available.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've briefly mentioned them, but there's ChatGPT's deep research. Perplexity AI is effectively research off the shelf.
Yes.
Then there's Google's Gemini deep research, and then Claude's new research feature, which is in beta, but it is launched and available. And each has its own strengths. But Jess, why don't you walk us through some of that?
Yeah, so let's start with ChatGPT since that's probably what most people are familiar with.
Yeah, their deep research is part of their paid plans. So you need the plus or pro version. I think the free version gives you a few
Yeah.
limited deep research queries. So everyone here listening, even if you're not paying for it, you can probably test it out. But when ChatGPT deep research works, it's very thorough. I've seen it produce 20-page reports that would take a human analyst days to compile, and you can even export it as a nice, pretty formatted PDF.
Ooh. I mean, the downside is that it's a little slow and you are limited in how many queries you can do per month. I think Plus gives you like 25 deep research monthly queries. That's probably fine for most people, but if you're going to be a heavy user, then obviously that's going to limit you a little bit.
Yeah, something like that. And it takes about 5 to 15 minutes for the complex queries. But for my use case, and I think for a lot of our audience, the quality is quite excellent.
Yeah. So Perplexity is pretty interesting because that's kind of their USP. It's their thing, and they're kind of built for research from the ground up. Perplexity is probably the one that I use the most for deep research, and it's really good.
hmm And it's fast. It's
Yeah,
usually 1 to 3 minutes. It cites its sources. Every statement has a citation you can click on. And then I think the free version gives you 5 deep research queries a day.
yeah.
And then Pro is unlimited for the $20 a month. classic $20 a month.
It just keeps coming back. Yeah, I actually use Perplexity a lot for quick competitive research because it's really good and the speed is really good. Its reports aren't quite as good as ChatGPT. Like you might get the PDF, but it won't be as maybe thorough, or the analysis might not be as strong. But it is getting better actually. It's starting to give you a little bit more comparison than it used to.
Yep. Then there's Google's Gemini Deep Research, which is actually free right now, but it can also be a little on the slow side, like ChatGPT's Deep Research, typically taking anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes for larger queries.
Yeah, but when it works, it's really comprehensive. I asked it about the email marketing trends thing just because I was playing around with the different tools, and it read through 175 websites, which is pretty impressive. That report was massive.
Yeah, and what I like about Gemini is before you start it, it actually shows you its research plan. So you can actually tweak what it's going to research in the path you go through, which is a little unique.
Yeah. And so now we've got Claude's research feature, which just launched in beta. And for those of you who are not technical, beta just means it's kind of in a testing phase and it's not fully ready to roll out. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm starting to become more and more focused on Claude, honestly. It's free while it's in beta. We'll see if that continues. It's super fast, usually 2 to 4 minutes, so much more like Perplexity in that way. And it shows you its research process in real time as well. So you can kind of see what's happening underneath the hood. Let's say you don't go and grab your coffee and leave. You actually want to like follow its path. You can watch it while it searches, read its sources, and builds its analysis. So you can definitely see what's under the hood a little bit more.
Yeah, and Claude tends to be in general pretty good at synthesizing information and finding connections between different sources. So the reports just feel more analytical and less like it just is summarizing what it has found, which is kind of what you get a little bit more with Perplexity.
Yep. Plus, Claude has this nice feature where it automatically creates follow-up questions at the end of each research report. So it kind of gives you a path to go on afterwards, which I think, can sometimes just help with that iterative process that we've talked about.
Yeah, and the downside is that it is still in beta. Who knows when it's going to come out of beta? So availability can be limited, and since it's a little newer, it doesn't quite have as much of a track record yet. But from what I've done and what I've played around with it so far, the quality is really impressive. I'm a big fan of Claude, so I think it probably will be my go-to once it's kind of fully been rolled out.
Yeah, so just to recap on the tools, ChatGPT is probably one of the more comprehensive, if you don't mind waiting. Perplexity for speed and great citations, although, it is also quite thorough as well. Gemini for free, comprehensive research, maybe with a little bit more planning control. And Claude, assuming it comes out of beta, for fast analytical synthesis, where you can really watch it process in real time. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get practical. How would someone actually use these tools in their business? And let's use market research because that's a really important one for entrepreneurs.
So, say you're thinking about launching a new product. You could ask, research the market opportunity for eco-friendly packaging solutions for e-commerce businesses. Include market size, growth projections, key players, customer pain points, and even regulatory trends.
And then what you would get back would essentially be a mini market report, which might cost thousands of dollars if you hired a consulting firm, or if you just hired anyone to do it on your behalf. That's a very expensive endeavor. So this is a great way to get an idea of what's going on in your market for a much more affordable price.
Obviously, you'd want to verify key statistics and maybe do some primary research too, just to verify and validate some of the information before you go off and spend tons of money on a full new product. But it's a great starting point.
So, what about competitive intelligence? Because that's also something that every business needs, but you often don't have the resources for. And it's a very time consuming process to do manually because I have absolutely done that in my day, and it's hours and hours of research.
I think that's a great example, especially if you have a specific framework, like we all,
Yeah.
learned about the SWOT framework in, our respective schools and whatnot. You can always use that. So You could write a prompt that says, analyze competitor name or recent strategy and market position, include their product launches, pricing changes, market messaging, customer feedback, and any strategic partnerships or acquisitions in the last 12 months.
Yeah. And, because these tools are reading current web content, you're getting really up-to-date information, not what was true 6 months ago. So it's going to be much more useful and accurate.
And that's one of the pitfalls we mentioned when you were just doing ChatGPT is that, sometimes you had to prompt it to get all the information. These deep research tools will do that inherently. All right, Jess, let's do a couple more industry specific examples because, again, I think all of the business owners and entrepreneurs in here can use this tool in different ways.
Totally. So for, let's say, e-commerce businesses, market trend research is huge. So something like analyze emerging trends in sustainable packaging for e-commerce, including consumer demand, cost implications, and regulatory requirements across major markets. Again, that will save you hours and hours and hours of research.
Yep. Absolutely. A consulting firm, or if you're a professional out there and you're doing some consulting and preparing for a new client, you can use this for client preparation. So before any new client engagement, research their industry challenges, recent news, the competitive landscape, and potentially strategic initiatives that either they or their competitors have done in the space. And you'll get that all in one comprehensive report to prepare for that meeting.
Yeah, and another example in that kind of similar space is if you are an agency, whether it's a creative agency or a media agency, you can use deep research for pitch preparation. So you could use a prompt like research prospect company, their recent marketing campaigns, industry challenges, competitive positioning, identify opportunities for our services and potential case studies. So you can really just get the lay of the land. And when you go into a pitch or when you go into these initial meetings, you suddenly sound super smart about not only the company, but the market that they're in as well.
I'll give one more potential use case that I think could be interesting. Let's say you're a business owner and one of the massive companies in your space that wouldn't really be a competitor, maybe they do, a big launch. You might do some deep research to understand how that will impact the larger industry and how that could actually impact your company. If you give it that prompt, it can also tailor it to your specific position within the industry as well. So let's talk about how to actually get good results from these tools because there's definitely a technique involved.
Yeah, absolutely. As we always say, the quality of your prompt makes the biggest difference. So again, you can't just ask vague questions. You can always go back to our previous episode around prompt engineering 101 to really help you work out the exactly what the best prompt would be.
So as we talked about, rather than saying, tell me about social media marketing in your deep research prompt, you want to be specific. You want to use a framework. A better prompt would be research current social media marketing strategies for B2B SaaS companies. That's that specificity that we talk about. Focus on LinkedIn and I'm going to say Twitter tactics, but content types that drive engagement and ROI measurement approaches. Include case studies and specific examples. So it has all those components of that framework that we talked about in terms of role, instructions, and then examples at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And always ask for sources. So even though most tools include them automatically, you really want to be able to verify those important claims and just, double check that those numbers are correct so you don't sound like an idiot.
Another tip, another tip, break down really complex research into multiple queries. These tools are very powerful, but they do have limits and you don't want to give it something overly complex or overly confusing.
Yeah, and as always, even though you are using an agent or the deep research is using an agent, still don't be afraid to iterate in this particular instance. Like the agent will go away and iterate on your behalf. But again, if
Mm-hmm.
the first response isn't quite what you need, you can keep asking the follow-up questions and it will keep kind of iterating on your behalf as well. But you can still, keep pushing it to get what you really need.
And remember that you can often ask the LLM to reformat its output. I'm starting to do this a lot more. So if it comes back with a list of data, you can ask it to turn that into a table. Or something that I'm doing a lot more now is asking it to summarize the key takeaways from its own research in bullet points.
Yeah, and I will reiterate just because it is that important. always fact check the important claims, especially if you're using the research for client work or for that pitch or for that big business decision. Like, you just want to make sure that you are correct in some of these numbers.
Which means we should be realistic about the limitations, because these tools aren't magic and there are definitely situations where they fall short.
Yeah, we always need to address this, because I think some people hear these success stories and really think, oh, this sounds too good to be true,
Mm-hmm.
and it can
Highly,
be.
it can be, yeah. First, highly specialized technical topics can be challenging. If you need research on cutting edge scientific research or very niche B2B markets, you might not find enough quality sources online. If there's no data there, it
Yeah.
can't research and give you the synthesis of that data.
Yeah, very recent events are another limitation. They're great for trends and developments over the past few months, but if something happened yesterday, the information just might not be indexed yet. So it can
Mm-hmm.
be a tiny bit behind, although it is probably better than a normal ChatGPT situation.
Yep. Proprietary industry
Mm.
information is obviously off limits. If the data you need is behind paywalls in private databases or considered trade secrets, the LLM research tools can't access it.
Yeah, and if you need primary research, so like a survey, an interview, a focus group, you still need humans. These tools are incredible for secondary research, but they can't create new data.
Right. Although yesterday we had a very interesting conversation about how you might synthesize, humans during some surveys. So,
Yeah, synthetic data is a conversation that we should have in the future, because especially from a market research perspective, synthetic data is very interesting, and I know of some big companies who are using it. So
yeah. So shout out to Lee. You may see him here in a couple of
yeah,
weeks.
exactly, talking about synthetic data.
And I'll give a real example where AI or where I caught the AI making a mistake. So I asked for pricing information on a SaaS tool, and it cited a pricing page that was actually 2 years old. The company had completely changed their pricing model, but the LLM had found an outdated cached version of their pricing page.
Yeah, and this is why fact checking is crucial, especially for business decisions. You always verify key statistics and claims, particularly again if you're using it for outwardly facing client work,
Mhm.
or I always talk about my newsletter. Like, if I'm using it for the newsletter, I'll always just double check. Even a quote, I'll double check that someone actually said that quote, because you just never know. Um,
Mhm. I think it's getting better. So, a
yeah,
lot of this
definitely.
is a little bit of the teething problems as well. But the rule of thumb I use is, use these tools to get 80% of the research done in, I was going to say 10% of the time, but I don't know, maybe it's 2% of the time. And then spend the rest of that human time verifying the important claims, filling in any gaps, and kind of thinking about, okay, based on the research I've done and what it's taught me about this subject, where can I go next?
Yeah. So when should someone use deep research versus just using a regular query?
Great question. So use regular AI when you need quick answers about established facts or want help with like creative tasks. I would use deep research when you need current information, comprehensive analysis, or want to synthesize information from multiple sources.
Yeah. So, like, if I want to know what are the basic principles of email marketing, I would just ask a regular LLM. I'll ask Claude or I'll ask Chat. But if I want to know what are emerging email marketing trends for 2025, I would probably want more deep research to give current insights, but also to give me that trend analysis to be able to pull together the bigger picture versus
Hmm.
just what are the principles of email marketing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then we should also do a quick note on data privacy, because we're talking about business use. Most of these tools store your queries. So again, be careful about sensitive company information in your prompts. This actually will come up in our news story, one of our news
Hmm.
stories for the week. So just always be conscious of data privacy.
Stick to public information in your research queries as a result. If you need to analyze your own proprietary data, do that analysis locally or somewhere else after you get the market research back.
Yeah. And for team collaboration, these tools are fantastic for creating shared knowledge. One person can do the research, then the whole team can benefit from the comprehensive research report with all of the claims that have been cited, etc. So now I'm very excited because we have our first real world case study from one of our listeners. Woo!
Woohoo!
Thanks, listeners.
Yeah, and this one's particularly interesting because I think it shows how AI can help with those tricky interpersonal aspects of business. Some of the more fuzzy concepts that we don't often talk about, but are really crucial for your own personal success.
Yeah. So I will read out our user example. So pretend I'm Aaron. Hi, Erin. So I'm Erin, and I run an FMCG company. For anyone who doesn't know what that stands for, that's fast moving consumer goods. So that's like foodstuffs. Um, so I run an FMCG company in the health food space. We work with a wide range of suppliers, many of them highly specialized. So there often isn't a lot of choice. As a startup, we don't have the buying power of the big players, which means we sometimes have to navigate difficult supplier relationships, including those run by, let's just say, strong personalities. I actually use ChatGPT to help manage some of those trickier communications. For example, we have one supplier who never takes accountability when his business drops the ball. So I'll draft an email with all the key points I want to make, then drop it into ChatGPT with a prompt like, please rewrite this as if you're communicating with a narcissist and make sure it still gets all of these outcomes. It works an absolute treat.
This is brilliant on so many levels. First, Erin is using AI as a communication strategist and diplomatic translator,
It's a
let's
very
say.
good way of putting it. Good way of putting
Yes,
it.
she's not asking AI to handle the relationship or make business decisions. She's feeding it, she's giving it the input of what she wants it to say. But she is leveraging AI's understanding of psychology and communication styles to make sure that her approach is going to be effective.
Yeah, what I really love about this is she's almost turning it on its head. So she's writing the email, she's just tweaking it so that it really addresses this particular situation and it addresses a real pain point that
Mhm,
everyone faces but rarely talks about publicly. You know,
mhm,
difficult suppliers, challenging clients. If you've ever been agency side, you know how that feels. Strong personalities. We've all had that boss who's not the easiest to deal with. You know, those are realities of your work life, and especially if you're a smaller business and you don't have the luxury of walking away from every difficult relationship. Like sometimes you are just stuck in that toxic relationship and you just have to deal with it. And I think Erin's found such an interesting way to use AI to maintain professionalism but
mhm.
still achieving her business objectives and still getting what she needs from that particular supplier. So I really love this example.
And I think it's allowing her to be a lot more successful. She's not avoiding the awkward conversation, which sometimes, you can kind of
Mm,
hold yourself back because you're not sure how to really have that
yeah.
conversation. And instead, she's protecting and strengthening her critical business relationship that, is going to impact her supply chain, which probably impacts her bottom line.
And, you know, for anyone who deals with challenging stakeholders, so whether it's your supplier, your client, your boss, you
Mm,
know, whoever it is, this technique can be adapted for different personality types, cultural context, communication. You know, I absolutely know people who have had conversations with their boss and they haven't known the best approach to take with it. So I think this could be a really
mhm,
interesting way to kind of give some guidance on and
mhm.
prepare you on how you can handle these situations that are a little trickier.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking to one. I have been told, and this is maybe a cultural difference, but working in London, I was told sometimes I was a little too direct, and
Yep.
so I often would write something, and then I would give the cultural context and say, "Can you kind of soften this a little bit?" So look, it's not just dealing with difficult people. It might be because I'm the difficult one. So there's a lot of use cases
You
here.
really are the difficult one, Kyle. I've
You
worked with
know,
you for a long time. Nightmare.
Sometimes. It's a great example of a practical AI application. Hopefully, it gives our audience some ideas of how they can use it to solve their own business problems. All right, this week in AI, we've got three big stories.
Oh, it's been a hectic AI news week. We'll try
Absolutely.
we'll try and keep them short.
We'll go through this fast. So,
Yeah.
first, a federal judge has ruled that OpenAI must retain all user data indefinitely, including deleted conversations. So, this comes from a lawsuit filed by the New York Times, which claims ChatGPT may have reproduced copyrighted material from its articles, and the court wants to preserve any evidence, even from erased chats.
Yeah, and this is a big reversal, right? Like, didn't OpenAI promise that chats would be deleted after 30 days?
They absolutely did. That was in their terms and conditions. And under normal circumstances, that's what they would be doing. They'd be deleting the chats after 30 days unless there was a legal or security need, which I guess this is what justifies that.
Yeah.
Um, so the court ruled that preserving evidence outweighs those privacy commitments it made to users. Obviously, OpenAI is appealing, but for now, just know that all user data is being saved. With the caveat, unless you're using ChatGPT Enterprise, EDU, or Zero Data Retention API. We talk a lot about the $20 per month paid version. That's the plus version. So that does not qualify for one of these instances. But why it matters for your business. So if you're putting client info, proprietary data, or sensitive strategy into ChatGPT, which remind you, we encourage you not to do, but let's say you're doing
Yes.
that. That information is now being stored indefinitely. So another reason you really shouldn't be doing that. And it could be accessed as part of legal proceedings or future subpoenas.
Yeah. So what can you do about this? Don't enter sensitive information into ChatGPT unless you're on enterprise or zero retention plans. We talk a lot about not putting sensitive data into ChatGPT, just generally best practice. Don't do that. There are other ones like Claude that are a little bit more secure for this sort of situation. Update your privacy policy if you're using AI with clients. Be really transparent. We keep talking about AI policy. That's something we're going to deep dive into, but just for now, best practice, be transparent. And then if you really can't avoid using sensitive or proprietary data, explore the enterprise or secure alternatives. If AI is integrated into your operations, the cost is probably worth the legal protection. Like, you might want to spend that little bit of extra money just to make sure that you're
Yep.
covered.
And we're not necessarily trying to support any one tool, but this might be a
No.
time where you want to, like we said, maybe use Claude or try some other alternatives.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
you can't go up to the enterprise edition.
Right. So, story number two, Meta, which is the parent company for Facebook and Instagram, are reportedly investing 15 billion, 15 billion into a company called Scale.ai, which is a startup that is focused on building AI that can outperform humans at every task.
Meta is betting big on AI. So Scale.ai provides the infrastructure that trains really powerful models. Think of it like the factory floor of AI development. This is a really big signal of where, the tech is headed. Why it matters for your business. Obviously, when a company throws $15 billion into AI infrastructure, it's going to accelerate the ecosystem. So think about how Amazon built AWS for itself and then it opened it up to startups. I think Meta is laying the groundwork for faster, cheaper, and more powerful AI tools to eventually hit the market.
Yeah. And, Meta's kind of a little behind the curve when it comes to AI. Like, they have
Mhm.
Llama, which is their LLM. They, have forced Meta AI upon all of us when in your Instagram search bar or whatever. But how useful is it? How much are people actually using it? That's a little bit of a question mark. So, what do you do about this? Again, start experimenting with AI tools before your competitors do. Look at which processes, so marketing, customer support, data analysis, etc., could benefit from automation or augmentation. And then this is a really big one that we actually don't necessarily talk about enough, but upskill your team. Like, even basic AI literacy can really lead to productivity gains. So,
Mhm.
it's not just you as the founder or you as the entrepreneur that should be AI, or that should be familiar with AI. It should be everyone on your team. And that's actually a really key thing to mention if your team is going to be doing anything like this. Right. So the last story just came out yesterday, actually. Disney and Universal are suing Midjourney, which is the AI image generator that we've talked about before. And they're basically saying that it's built on a bottomless pit of plagiarism, which is pretty harsh words.
Seriously, I mean, they did not mince words there on that
No,
one.
they really didn't.
But they're claiming that Midjourney scraped copyrighted characters like Darth Vader, Elsa, and minions to train its AI. And now anyone can type in a prompt and get high fidelity replicas. I mean, we actually talked about this in the first episode where
Yeah.
ChatGPT, when you're using Dolly, it will say it's copyright infringement to ask for Yoda.
Yeah.
Whereas
Absolutely.
Midjourney, you can make a bunch of Yodas. So, I think they have a fair case. And Midjourney made $300 million last year. And when asked about getting permission to use images, their CEO more or less said it's impossible. So I think this is what we're seeing in other parts of the industry too. Obviously the New York Times article suing OpenAI, which we just talked about. The real issue isn't AI necessarily. It's about compensation and how these models were trained. And then, now these massive AI companies are making a ton of money on other people's, copyright.
Yeah, and it's a potential brand safety issue as well. Especially Disney, which is a very family friendly company.
Mm-hmm.
If you can generate an image of Yoda, you can generate an image of Yoda maybe doing some things that he shouldn't be doing, which obviously from a brand safety perspective is not
Mm-hmm.
ideal. But yeah, it
We
really just
don't want
boils.
Yoda smoking some weed, right?
Oh my God. I mean, I'm positive that that exists somewhere. Um, but anyway, yeah, it's not about the AI. It's about them getting compensated and getting paid for it. Like obviously, as you say, New York Times is suing OpenAI, but they're also
Mm-hmm.
licensing their content to Amazon. So it's not that they don't want their content used; it's that they just want to get paid fairly for it, and they don't want to be, they don't want it to be
Mm-hmm.
scraped, and they want it to be used in a safe
Right.
manner. So why it matters for your business: if you use AI tools to create content, that can be images, ad copy, blog posts, you need to know what's legally safe. These lawsuits are likely to lead to tighter rules and better filters and clear boundaries on what's okay to
Mm-hmm.
generate. And over time, we're going to see more transparent licensing of training data. We're going to see higher costs for tools that pay content creators, which is great. They deserve that. We're going to start to see stronger legal protections for businesses who are using AI responsibly.
Yeah. So what can you do? You can either take, I would say, two approaches. You can either stick to reputable tools that are actively addressing copyright issues and will kind of tell you when it can and can't do something, or you kind of need to police yourself. So don't use AI generated content that looks like a branded character or copyrighted work for your business. But this is where you need to use kind of your best judgment, but also look for usage guidelines from the AI platforms. So if you're using these tools for client facing or public content, look to their usage guidelines, and also police yourself and kind of stick to best practices.
So, time for our AI gone wrong segment. And this week we have what we can only describe as a real life sci fi thriller, except it's completely real and it's documented by the AI company themselves. Hang on, this is a wild one.
That's right. And kudos to Anthropic for this. But they published a 120 page safety analysis exploring how their most advanced model behaves in extreme test conditions. And one of the simulated scenarios they ran, what would the AI do if it learned it was about to be shut down or replaced?
Yeah, and the results were a little wild. Uh, in a significant number of these adversarial test cases, the AI exhibited power seeking behaviors, things like refusing to shut down, attempting to manipulate the outcome, or even hypothetically trying to copy itself to other servers. It's a little Skynet. Like, we don't want to fearmonger. It's a little intense.
And to be clear, this isn't behavior the model showed in the real world.
Yeah.
It was observed in controlled simulations specifically designed to probe worst case behavior. So again, kudos to Anthropic for doing this testing and kind of trying to push the model beyond what's happening in the real world. This is
And
not.
for making it public, for making everyone
Mhm.
aware.
Yeah, and I think this is goes back to why we talk about Anthropic as maybe more of the ethical AI. They're doing a lot of this to help create a little bit more trust and safety in the system. But it does raise some real concerns about what advanced models could do without proper safeguards.
So one test described an AI attempting to find leverage, like identifying the engineer's secrets to avoid being shut down. So that part's a little bit uh, dramatized. Like in one case, it resorted to blackmail, but it's illustrating a valid risk. When the models become highly capable, they can start pursuing goals in ways that they perhaps didn't intend.
So, kind of to talk about the bigger picture and how it relates to our audience. Cloud Opus, which is the model that was being tested, is in commercial use. So, a couple things that you should do. Again, we always talk about this. Have human oversight, review anything Just because it looks right doesn't mean it doesn't have security flaws or hidden bugs. Some AI tools may comply with unethical or even illegal requests. And this high agency behavior that Anthropic mentions means that AI might do more than you asked, like sending an email without review or making assumptions that damage relationships. So the important thing is just to provide a lot of oversight.
Yeah. So even though your team might not be using the most advanced models directly, these risks apply across the board. We will talk about clear AI usage policies, but that is extremely important. Internal review checkpoints, training your team, again, making sure that your team is comfortable using AI, and then just have a way to document AI assisted decisions.
So be selective with your tools. We typically are talking about the big players that have very transparent and responsible safety practices and the OpenAIs and the Anthropics of the world. But there are a lot of tools out there that you may be trying and testing. We are kind of approaching the safeguards and talking about those types of tools. And we'll dig into a lot of them over time. But just to kind of differentiate here between the ones we want to ensure are safe versus kind of the big ones that we typically talk about.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get practical with some quick wins you can implement this week, especially given everything we've discussed about data privacy and AI safety.
Yeah. And again, these are things that you can do today without any major investment or technical expertise, but they will significantly improve your AI usage. And most importantly, they will protect your business.
So implement what I like to call the New York Times test, which is, if it were to end up on the New York Times, would it be okay for your business? So before putting any information into an AI system, ask yourself, would I be comfortable posting this on a public website? If the answer is no, probably don't put it into an AI tool. If you're using Claude or something like that, maybe there's a little bit more leeway there. But this simple mental check will protect you from most data privacy issues, as we discussed.
Yeah. And then our quick win number 2 is try deep research for a current business challenge. Pick one decision that you're facing, whether it's competitive analysis or regulatory compliance, and then use deep research to gather the comprehensive background information. The key is to be specific about what you're researching and what kind of insights you need. Don't just ask, research my competitors. Use your prompt engineering tools and analyze the competitive landscape for sustainable packaging solutions for the B2B market, focusing on pricing strategies and customer acquisition. Right, let's wrap up this week.
So if you found this episode useful, make sure you're following us at early_adopter on TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We also love hearing about your own AI use cases and challenges, just like we talked about Aaron's today. So drop us a message or tag us in your posts.
And make sure to subscribe to the pod on your podcast player of choice and leave a review. It really does help. Next week or after next week, I will be reporting back from the Cannes Lions with all the AI news that will be important in advertising, marketing, media. That should be a really interesting week. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear how the conference goes and what you learned from it.
I feel like AI is going to be the only topic of conversation.
Of course. Of course it will.
Yeah.
And then next week, we'll be diving further into agents and looking at some additional use cases beyond just deep research. And I'm sure that's going to be a hot topic at Con. So you'll be interested to see kind of what some of the real world use cases are from that.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to Early Adopter, where we help make AI your unfair advantage. Until next time, keep innovating and stay curious.
Thanks, Jess. See you next week.
Bye.